morning haze hung low over the hills, sunlight barely slicing through the drifting fog, casting Dylan Myers's rural homestead in a dreamy sort of calm. His chickens clucked lazily beyond the barn, and the hum of cicadas buzzed faintly from the surrounding pine trees. Dylan stood on his porch in flannel and work boots, coffee in hand, taking in the scene he'd worked years to achieve. After saving every spare dollar from his tech job in the city, he had finally bought 5 acres of freedom. No HOA, no nosy neighbors, just space. That piece, however, cracked like a brittle twig the moment he noticed the SUV. It had pulled up sometime during his early morning chores. At first he thought nothing of it, perhaps a lost delivery driver or someone checking a map, but the vehicle didn't move. It sat across the gravel road from his driveway, engine off. The driver visible only in glints of movement behind tinted windows. He squinted through the mist and finally made out the figure. A woman, older, stiff posture, oversized sunglasses, shielding her eyes. Her face was unreadable, but what caught his attention most was the clipboard resting on her lap. She didn't look confused. She looked focused. He gave a casual wave, stepping closer. That's when the SUV roared to life. The tires spat gravel as the vehicle whipped backward, then shot off down the road with a spray of dust trailing behind it. Dylan stood frozen, coffee forgotten in his hand. It wasn't just odd, it felt personal. Shrugging off the unease, he returned to his chores. Maybe she was scouting land. Maybe she'd mistaken his driveway for a turn-in. But in the back of his mind, a flicker of doubt took root. 2 days later, that flicker ignited into something more. The sheriff's cruiser didn't have its lights on, but the moment it pulled into the long dirt driveway, Dylan knew trouble had come knocking. The 2 deputies stepped out, casual but alert. The taller one held a tablet in hand, already reviewing notes. "You Dylan Myers?" the deputy asked. Dylan nodded slowly. "Something wrong?" The deputy cleared his throat. "We received a complaint about a possible hazard on your property. An electric fence allegedly exceeding safe voltage and bordering a public access area." Dylan nearly laughed. "You've got to be kidding. The fence is legal. And there's no public anything near here. This is private land all around." The deputy exchanged a glance with his partner. The report was filed by a resident representative from Birchwood Pines. That name landed like a stone in Dylan's stomach. Birchwood Pines wasn't just another town, it was a gated HOA community 2 miles away. His property wasn't under their jurisdiction, wasn't even in the same zip code, he tried to explain. The fence was low voltage, completely legal under county code. It had posted warning signs, clearly visible every 30 feet. It posed no threat to people unless they scaled it, intentionally, and even then, it would barely give a jolt, just enough to keep coyotes out. The officers didn't seem particularly concerned, but they were required to document everything. They snapped photos, logged coordinates, and left with apologetic shrugs. "Probably nothing," one of them muttered. "But you know how it is, liability." Dylan watched them drive away, his heart thrumming with unease. It wasn't the visit itself that disturbed him, it was the implication that someone in that community thought they had a say in what happened on his land. Someone had crossed a line, and if they'd gone to this much trouble already, what would they do next? Inside his house, he replayed the memory of the SUV, the clipboard, the sunglasses, the calculated stare. That woman wasn't just watching, she was planning something. The next morning, Dylan's phone buzzed with an unknown number just after sunrise. He let it ring through. A few minutes later, another call came, same number, no message. By the third he picked up, irritation already bubbling. "Hello?" The woman's voice was brittle, overly formal. "Mr. Myers, this is Karen Thompson. I'm the president of the Birchwood Pines Homeowners Association." He blinked. "Okay, I don't live in Birchwood Pines." "I'm aware," she replied curtly. "However, your electric fence poses a threat to our community's integrity. You're within the visual corridor of our main walking path, and we've received complaints." Dylan walked to the window, staring out across his land. "You're 2 miles away. I'm not even in the same district. Community image doesn't end at legal boundaries," she snapped. "We intend to pursue a resolution." The line went dead before he could respond. Later that day, he caught her in person. Again, same silver SUV, this time parked halfway across his gravel driveway. She emerged with confidence that didn't match the trespass. A visor shaded her tight-lipped scowl, and a badge-shaped pin glinted on her collar. "Ma'am, you're on private property." Dylan called out. Karen held up a folder. "This is a cease and desist letter concerning your electric fence. It's a safety hazard. Children pass nearby. We're well within our rights to file an injunction. There are no children, no passersby, no community. This is a farm." Karen marched closer, as if she hadn't heard a word. "We've already submitted complaints to the Sheriff's Department, County Code Enforcement, and the Environmental Commission." "Environmental Commission," he scoffed. "What does that have to do with anything?" "The fence may interfere with migratory wildlife," she said, dead serious. "And we believe you've altered the land without proper drainage permits." Dylan's patience snapped. "Lady, I bought this property fair and square. You and your HOA don't run the county. I'll give you 10 seconds to get off my land before I call the cops for real." She stood there, blinking slowly, like the concept of pushback had never occurred to her. Then she turned, unbothered, and walked back to her car. As she drove off, he saw her pick up her phone. Her lips moved furiously, mid-rant. That look she wore wasn't defeat. It was preparation. By sundown, he knew she hadn't been bluffing. White utility truck from the local power company arrived just as he was feeding the chickens. The driver, a young guy with a clipboard and confused eyes, asked to inspect the wiring set up for the fence. "We got a tip," he said sheepishly. "Anonymous report. Claimed you were overloading the transformer. Had to follow up." Dylan shook, his head, jaw tightening. "Go ahead, but I promise, everything's by the book." The technician checked it over, took a few photos, and apologized as he left. "Looks fine to me. Doesn't even draw that much current. Some people just get bored and stir up trouble. I guess trouble." That word echoed in Dylan's head long after the truck was gone. This was more than boredom. Karen had come with documents, legal threats, and coordinated calls. She wasn't just complaining, she was launching a campaign. And what unsettled him more than anything else? She hadn't once asked him to turn off the fence. No, it wasn't about the fence. It was about control. 2 days of silence passed, but Dylan didn't believe for a second that it was over. Karen hadn't gotten what she wanted, and people like her didn't vanish. Quietly, they regrouped. Sure enough, on the third morning, Dylan spotted a new sign just off the road, right before the turn-in to his property. It was staked in loose gravel, neatly laminated, and printed in bold red letters. "Caution, illegal electric fence ahead. Proceed at your own risk." He stepped out of his truck, ripped it from the ground, and stared back toward the road. No cars, no witnesses, but he knew exactly who had placed it. Later that afternoon, he heard voices outside, several of them. He walked to his fence line and saw a small group gathered across the road, a mix of middle-aged men and women, all dressed like they were heading to brunch, not the edge of farmland. They held signs with slogans like, "Keep our roads safe" and "No shock zones near families." At the front, arms crossed like a general on parade, stood Karen Dot. The sheer absurdity made Dylan bark a laugh. "You've got to be kidding." Karen stepped forward without flinching. "We're within public easement space. You can't stop us from protesting. You're standing across from a chicken coop? The only thing your kids are at risk of catching out here is a sunburn." A few of the protesters murmured, unsure whether to laugh or glare. Karen didn't miss a beat. "Your disregard for public concern is unacceptable. We've drafted a community-wide petition. Over 100 signatures already." Dylan smirked. 100 people from a neighborhood I don't live in. Karen leaned in, eyes like steel pins. "You think this is about geography? This is about standards. Birchwood Pines has a reputation to uphold, and your little livestock setup is an eyesore. We don't want people thinking they can just throw up wires and call it civilization." The mask had slipped. Dylan stood still for a beat, his mind cataloging every word. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about property lines. It was about image. Karen didn't care that his land was legal, protected, and outside her jurisdiction, had offended her sense of suburban perfection. That evening, Dylan reviewed his camera footage from the fence perimeter. He fast-forwarded through quiet fields and clucking hens until the screen flickered movement near the south side. He respawned there. At 3:14 a.m., headlights pierced the dark. The same silver SUV. The figure stepped out wearing a hoodie and gloves. She walked the length of the fence and, in the eerie glow of infrared, appeared to clip something to the wire. Dylan zoomed in. It was a stuffed animal. A child's plush rabbit, tied to the electric line like some kind of grim prop. Below it, a sign written in red marker. "What if this was your kid?" Dylan sat back in his chair, pulse climbing. The cameras hadn't just captured trespassing, they'd caught evidence of psychological warfare of someone. Intentionally staging scenes to provoke action, he picked up his phone and started dialing the sheriff. But something gave him pause. If Karen was already this unhinged, what would she do when she realized he was fighting back? By the time the sheriff's deputy returned his call, Dylan had already downloaded the footage to 3 separate flash drives and stored them in different places on the property. He wasn't taking chances. The deputy, a worn-out man named Haskins with a voice like gravel, sounded weary but concerned once he heard the details. "She tied a child's toy to your electric fence?" Haskins asked, and planted a fake warning sign. "I've got her car. On camera at 3 in the morning, trespassing, staging scenes, interfering with private property, you name it." There was a pause. "You sure you want to escalate this?" The question landed with unexpected weight. "What do you mean?" Dylan asked. "Karen Thompson's name comes up more than you'd think," Haskins replied. "Code complaints, civil, noise violations, zoning disputes. She knows how to weaponize procedure without getting her hands too dirty. The second you press charges, she'll bury you in counterfilings. Not saying you shouldn't, but be ready." Dylan's jaw clenched. "I didn't move to the middle of nowhere just to get pushed around by a suburban dictator. I'll file the report. Then come by in the morning, bring the footage." That night, Dylan barely slept. Every rustle outside had him sitting up, listening. At one point, he thought he heard footsteps near the coop, but by the time he grabbed his flashlight and checked, There was nothing but startled hens and shifting shadows. Still, he double-checked the voltage meter on the fence perfectly within safe range. He walked the full perimeter with a bat in hand. No new signs. No new plush animals. But the next morning, something far worse arrived. He pulled out of his driveway. Early footage in his glove box. Intention in his chest. But half a mile down the road, just past a bend near a ravine, he slammed on the brakes. Barricades. Two orange cones flanked a handmade wooden sign nailed to a tree that read, "Future Site of Birchwood Pines Community Nature Trail. Access begins here." Dylan stepped out of his truck slowly. The sign was freshly painted. Below it, in smaller text, "In partnership with the Birchwood Pines, HOA, and County Beautification Board." His hands curled into fists. They were trying to annex the road. The nature trail didn't exist. There were no county documents, no public proposals. This was a bluff, an audacious lie dressed in fake municipal clothing. If the HOA could convince the county that this stretch of land was part of some shared green space initiative, they might force an easement or worse, open the door for future development right next to his property. That's when he noticed the small group of people standing at the bottom of the hill, 4 of them, wearing safety vests and snapping photos like surveyors. One of them pointed at Dylan's truck, then raised a phone to his ear. Dylan didn't wait. He got back in the truck, turned around, and sped toward the sheriff's office. If Karen was pulling strings in county departments, things were moving faster than he thought. By the time he arrived, though, he found something unexpected. Deputy Haskins wasn't at the front desk. A younger deputy told Dylan he'd gone out on medical leave due to back injury. He'd be gone for at least a week. No one else seemed eager to handle a messy HOA dispute. Dylan left his report anyway, handed over the flash drive, and walked out with a knot in his gut. Something had changed. It wasn't just Karen anymore, it was a network. And whatever they were planning next, it wasn't just about fences or chickens. They were trying to erase the lines between his land and their reach until there was no boundary at all. For the first time since moving to the countryside, Dylan began to regret his isolation. The sheriff's office had taken his footage and statement, but with Deputy Haskins out on leave, no one returned his follow-up calls. The front desk passed him around like a cold cup of coffee, lukewarm interest, no real action. Meanwhile, the so-called nature trail sign remained planted on the roadside. By the third day, they'd added a small wooden kiosk and a cheap bench that looked like it had been dragged from someone's garage. It was laughably fake, but dangerous in what it implied. Karen was building a narrative, one piece at a time. The cones, the sign, the staged plush toy, even the protest toll, to make Dylan look like a rogue element threatening a community's idyllic vision. She wasn't just attacking his property, she was eroding the perception of his legitimacy. Dylan knew he needed leverage, something beyond words, something public. He spent the next day gathering documentation, copies of his property deed, county maps proving there was no public easement, voltage readings from his electric fence, and time-stamped security footage. Then, he posted everything in a long, detailed thread on a local community message board, not Birchwood Pines' HOA-controlled site, but a broader regional forum known for local complaints and watchdog posts. The thread caught fire. Dozens of commenters chimed in, some defending Dylan's rights, others sharing their own horror stories of Karen and her HOA board. One man claimed she tried to report his backyard greenhouse as a code violation due to the color of his compost bin. Another said she'd once threatened to fine him for aggressive hummingbird feeders. The attention emboldened Dylan. He printed screenshots, gathered statements, and sent everything to the county zoning board, demanding an investigation into the false nature trail and unauthorized signage. For a moment, it felt like the tide was turning, but then came the letter. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, slipped into his mailbox with no postage. The letter had read, Birchwood Pines Legal Affairs Committee. Dylan rolled his eyes. It sounded official, but smelled of Karen. The letter claimed Dylan's property was under review for public nuisance designation due to unregulated deterrent systems and unkempt visual elements affecting nearby community image. They were requesting a public compliance hearing, with a date already listed for the following week. It was nonsense he lived outside any HOA jurisdiction. It was crafted to sound real. Dangerous even. That evening, Dylan found his north fence line damaged. One of the insulators had been snapped clean off. A short length of wire lay twisted in the dirt, and nearby his electric fence keep out. Sin had been torn down completely. It wasn't an accident, and whoever had done it wanted him to find it. He fixed the damage quickly, replacing the hardware and inspecting the voltage. But a deeper current of worry buzzed through him now because if someone had touched that fence, they either didn't believe it was dangerous, or they wanted to provoke it. That night, unable to sleep, he checked his trail cams. The usual critters flashed by: a raccoon, a deer, a barn owl sweeping low. But just after 2 a.m., something else appeared. A person hooded, standing just outside the fence line. They didn't move. They didn't approach. They just stood there watching. Dylan leaned in, squinting at the grainy footage. He couldn't see the face, but he noticed something chilling. The figure wasn't alone. In the far corner of the frame, hidden in the dark another figure stepped back into the trees. Morning light did little to ease the chill that had crept into Dylan's bones. The image of those two figures by the fence still clung to him, heavy and silent. They hadn't tampered with anything that he could see, no signs of forced entry, no new damage. But their presence, especially the way they had stood there, it felt like a message, or a warning. He downloaded the footage, zoomed in frame by frame. Still no clear faces. One wore a hood, the other moved just before the camera could catch any detail. But the taller one, the one who backed into the trees, carried something in their hand. Dylan enhanced the frame a clipboard, or maybe a tablet, hard to tell. He stepped outside, determined to examine that area in person. The grass there was still damp with dew, but he noticed two deep impressions in the dirt near the fence. Heavy boots, one set, the other ... nothing, not even a scuff. As if the second figure had floated away, but then he spotted it, wedged under a root, barely visible, a silver HOA pin, the kind Karen always wore. It glinted faintly in the morning sun, like a dropped badge of office. He pocketed it, heart pounding. Was Karen out here herself last night, or had she sent others wearing her emblem like soldiers under a banner? He didn't wait to find out. Instead of going back inside, Dylan drove into town and made a detour to the county records office. If Karen was filing false notices, forging legal-looking documents, or coordinating with corrupt HOA board members, there had to be a paper trail. He requested all recent permit applications involving land use, public trail proposals, or beautification projects near his address. The clerk, a pale man with tired eyes, frowned at the request. "Funny thing," he said, tapping his keyboard. "You're the third person asking about that this week." Dylan leaned forward. "Who else?" The man hesitated. "Can't say for sure. One was a woman dressed real proper. Asked if this zone was slated for redevelopment. Left without filing anything. The other two were men in suits. Didn't leave names. Just took notes." Dylan's blood turned cold. The clerk eventually handed him a printed list. Dylan flipped through the records quickly until one entry stopped. It was dated 2 weeks ago. A preliminary request had been filed to begin an environmental restoration corridor along the back edge of his property. The applicant wasn't the county IT, was the Birchwood Pines HOA Beautification Subcommittee. Dylan stared at the fine print. The proposed trail extension didn't just run near his land, it crossed it. According to the sketch map attached, it cut right through his chicken coop and wrapped around his barn like it belonged to someone else. "How the hell is this even legal?" he muttered. The clerk shrugged. "It's not approved yet, but once it's filed, it's on the books. Some folks try to pressure owners into selling or complying to make it easier for the next step. Most people fold before it gets that far." Dylan folded the paper slowly. "But I'm not most people." That night, he set up extra cameras, 3 new motion-triggered ones near the north tree line, and one hidden inside the old scarecrow in his field. He wasn't sleeping until he had proof of who was coming onto his land. Just after midnight, motion alerts pinged his phone. He watched live as the figure in the hoodie returned. Alone this time, they moved with purpose. No hesitation. They walked straight up to the fence, crouched, and placed something on the ground. A box. Then, they walked away. Dylan grabbed his flashlight, loaded his revolver, and sprinted toward the drop point. When he reached the fence line, the figure was already gone. The box sat quietly in the grass, a plain brown cube sealed with clear tape. A note was taped on top. He peeled it open slowly, pulse thudding in his ears. Inside was a single item, a child's sneaker burned at the toe, wires sticking out from the laces. The note said only one thing: "Next time it won't be a toy." Dylan didn't sleep that night. The shoe in the note sat sealed in a Ziploc bag on his kitchen table, glaring at him like a ticking clock. It had been real. The threat, the trespassing, the surveillance, none of it was exaggeration. Someone was escalating, and fast. The problem was, he no longer believed this was just about an electric fence or HOA vanity. He spent the early hours poring over everything again: his deed, the property lines, county maps, and then something caught his eye. The northern boundary of his land overlapped by a thin sliver with a patch labeled UTI owned. It wasn't active. It had been decommissioned decades ago, a leftover from when the area was zoned for industrial expansion that never happened. But technically, it wasn't his land, and it was that sliver Karen's proposed nature trail crossed. Dylan stared at the overlay, gears turning in his mind. That was the opening. That tiny, bureaucratic loophole was her foothold, her fiction masquerading as fact. If she could convince the county that her trail had a legal anchor, the rest would follow like dominoes. But why go to such lengths? Why him? He didn't wait for sunrise. He grabbed the Ziploc bag and drove to the only person he could trust now, Deputy Haskins. The deputy's home was a modest house just outside town, quiet and tucked behind a line of overgrown hedges. Haskins opened the door wearing a back brace and a skeptical look. "You're supposed to be on bed rest," Dylan said. "You're supposed to be left alone by HOA psychos." Haskins shot back. "Come in." Inside, Dylan laid everything out: flash drive, the shoe, the photos of the fake trail, even the silver HOA pin. Haskins listened quietly, nodding as the pieces fell together. You know what this is, right? He asked finally. Enlighten me. Karen's not acting alone. She's just the face. The HOA board is covering something, or building towards something big. You ever hear the rumors about what Birchwood Pines used to be? No. Before the development, that land was tied up in an old tech firm's research project, military contracts, surveillance equipment. Rumor was, they buried something out here gear, maybe files when the feds pulled the plug. No one ever found it, but lately, I've heard chatter the HOA's been digging, quietly, using beautification projects as cover. Dylan felt the air leave his lungs. The visits, the trail, the watchers in the night. It wasn't about appearances, it was about access. They think whatever was buried is under my property, Dylan muttered. Haskins nodded grimly. And your fence, especially if it's electrified, complicates their plans. Dylan stood, a sudden fire under his ribs. Then we beat them at their own game. But when he returned home, something was wrong. His gate was open. The front door to the house, unlocked. Inside. Drawers were open, cabinets disturbed, but nothing was stolen. Not valuables. Not electronics. Only one thing was missing. The flash. Drives. The backups. Gone. He stormed to his office, heart pounding. The walls still held the maps. The footage was still in his cloud account, but the local copies, the things he had planned to use in court, were wiped clean. And in the center of his desk sat a single folded sheet of paper. Typed. Neat. Anonymous. Read. The land beneath your house belongs to history. Step aside, or be buried with it. For the first time since it all began, Dylan felt fear settle deep in his bones. Not the fear of confrontation, but the fear of being outnumbered, outplanned, and completely surrounded. They weren't just trying to take his fence. They were after something buried far deeper, and now, they were inside. Dylan didn't bother calling the sheriff's office. He knew how it would go. More delays, more shrugs, more vanishing files. The storm had come home, and if he didn't root it out himself, it would consume everything. He closed every blind in the house and powered off his phone. Then, with a generator running and security cams rewired to an isolated hard drive, he began searching, tracing the signs, looking for any spot on his land that could hold a buried secret. He walked the perimeter of the coop, the shed, even the base of the old water tower, dragging a metal detector in slope sweeping arcs. Nothing. Until he reached the northeast corner, right where the fake nature trail had been sketched to curve into his land. There, the metal detector screamed. The soil was soft, too soft for the time of year. He grabbed a shovel and started digging, the sky dimming behind him as twilight dropped over the trees, a foot deep. Then 2, the metal rang out again, louder, closer. At just under 3 feet, the tip of his shovel struck something solid. He cleared away the dirt, a steel hatch. Old, rusted at the hinges, but unmistakably built to last. Bolted shut. He stared at it, stunned. Karen hadn't been bluffing. There was something under his land. But before he could pry it open, headlights flashed through the trees. A caravan of 3 black SUVs turned down his long dirt drive, their tires kicking up dust like a silent threat. Dylan backed away from the hatch and sprinted to the house, grabbing his revolver and slipping the flash drive into his pocket, the only untouched copy. By the time he reached the front porch, the cars had stopped. Karen stepped out of the lead vehicle, wearing a blazer and slacks instead of her usual visor and clipboard. Behind her, 2 men in dark suits followed. She looked up at him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Holt, she called calmly. You've been trespassing on our asset. Dylan aimed the revolver low. This is my property. I've got the deeds, the maps, the footage. You're not walking in here with a smirk and rewriting that? Karen's smile widened. That's where you're wrong. You think this is about a fence, a coop? No. This land was leased by Valor Tech Inc. In 1987, under a defense research grant. The federal designation was removed, but the asset beneath remained. Quiet, forgotten. She gestured behind her. Until we bought the paper trail. The suited men stepped forward, badges flashing briefly, but not police. Not federal. Private security. Corporate. You're nothing but a holdout. Mr. Holt, a problem to be ... contained. Dylan took a step back. If you're so confident, why sneak around like rats? Karen's voice dropped. Because if people knew what was buried here, this entire county would turn upside down. We're trying to keep it quiet. Professional. You've already cost us delays. But now, you have a choice. One of the men pulled a sleek, matte envelope from his coat. Karen held it out. Sign this. Transfer the disputed boundary. Walk away. We'll pay you double what your land is worth. Dylan stared at her. Then he slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive. He held it up. I already sent copies to 3 different journalists. One of them already contacted me back. You touch me, this becomes a national headline. Karen's face twitched just for a second. Dylan smiled. You should have stayed on your own side of the fence. Silence followed. Heavy, calculating. Then Karen stepped back, straightened her blazer, and nodded once to her men. They turned. No threats. No violence. Just silence. and retreat. As the SUVs drove away, Dylan exhaled, knees weak but unbent. He never opened the hatch. Whatever was under there wasn't meant to be unearthed. But he reinforced the area, added and marked the fence clearly. Weeks passed, no more plush toys, no fake protesters, no Karen. Just quiet. But every so often, at night, a light flickered in the woods watching, because the war never really ends when the enemy thinks the ground beneath your feet still belongs to them, and Dylan, he wasn't moving, not ever.